Chapter 1. Robert Johnson is in town. The summer of 1936, Robert Johnson stood in front of Walker's General Store and gas station adjoining the Martinsville train depot. He put down his bag, made of blue and white bed ticking packed full of clothes, at least one notebook and other belongings, and began playing his guitar. He was there to advertise his nighttime performance at O'Malley's, a bootleg house not far from the old Damascus church just north of neighboring Hazelhurst's city limits, up the railroad tracks on the east side of old Highway 51. Hazelhurst was a town of about 3,000 souls, sitting 35 miles south of Jackson, Mississippi. Robert had been born in Hazelhurst 25 years earlier, and now he was there to play his blues at one of the many juke joints he frequented throughout the area. A slight 5'8" and 140 pounds, Robert was well known for more than just his music. Robert had already gotten one local girl pregnant, Virgie Jane Smith, and the men in and around Hazelhurst wanted to make sure that was not going to happen to their daughters. Rosa Redmond was 11 years old that year. Later, a short, plump history teacher, she lived most of her life on the old Mangold plantation, near both the house where Robert was born and old Malley's juke. She recalled that Robert's presence would create a certain stir among the residents. People would know when Robert was in town. The men would let people know, and if they saw him coming up the road, our mothers would make all the girls go inside. It was okay for our older brothers, uncles, or fathers to go see him play and get drunk. But it was off limits to us girls. They'd keep us inside and locked up. His blues was the devil's music and could only lead to sin. Throughout the Delta region and beyond, Robert's rambling had left a trail of drunken men and broken-hearted women. Whether he was playing a juke like O'Malley's, a picnic, or a party, Robert was always looking for a woman to satisfy his needs financially or sexually. His songs were often a tool to seduce some woman he took a fancy to, and the human remnants he left behind were well known to locals. He even bragged about his conquests in one of his songs, Traveling Riverside Blues. I got women's in Vicksburg clean on to Tennessee, but my Friars Point rider now hops all over me. Robert Johnson was using his guitar abilities to forge the transition from the older blues of Charlie Patton, Henry Ragtime Texas Thomas, Leadbelly, or even Son House to the more modern approach and sounds of Muddy Waters and the post-war blues players. He played blues, pop tunes, jazz, and ragtime, started to popularize the use of guitar riffs as signature elements of a song, and was one of the first to use a boogie beat for his rhythm accompaniment, copying the driving rhythmic bass that barrelhouse pianists played with their left hand. His playing helped move blues guitar fretting out of the first position and into the use of the entirety of the fretboard, opening musical possibilities that had previously been reserved for jazz guitarists. He was a dancer and harmonica player in ways that surprised his companions, and he used all his entertainment talents as vehicles to further his quest for fame and freedom from the burdens of sharecropping, and even perhaps from the Jim Crow racism of the South. Yet, in spite of his considerable talents, Robert displayed an untrusting and insecure personality. He refused to let you pay too close attention to how he was playing, turning his back on you, or stopping his playing completely if he thought you were watching him too closely. But Robert also had an unrelenting desire for a good time, and his personal exploits would eventually lead to myth and speculation. He did little to make his world clear, for he refused to speak about his family, and life, and he never, if he ever knew about them, did anything to either validate or disavow the ideas about him that circulated amongst his listeners and acquaintances. He was a chameleon who was perhaps on his own search for his true identity. By the time Rose or Redmond saw him, Robert's rambling had become both his main way of traveling from one musical job to the next, and his way to satisfy his need to just get up and go. His travels on both sides of the Mississippi River took him on circuitous journeys throughout Mississippi and parts of Louisiana and Arkansas. He followed Highway 1, which ran along the Mississippi River, Highways 61 and 49, which went north and south through the center of the Delta, and Highway 82, which ran east and west. Robert found places to play and sing in Greenwood, Itabena, Moorhead, where the Southern Cross of the Dog, Indianola, Holly Ridge, Leland, and Greenville, all located on Highway 82. From Greenville, Robert traveled north on Highway 1, stopping at Winterville, Lamont, Beulah, Rosedale, Gunnison, Sherrard, and then into Clarksdale. From Clarksdale, he had several options. He could continue north on Highway 61 and stop at Jonestown, with a detour west to Friars Point, Lula, the one-time home of Charlie Patton, Tunica, Robinsonville, where his mother lived, Walls, and then his Memphis home. Memphis was where he spent his seminal childhood years, the home of the family he considered his true kin, headed by Charles Dodds Spencer, his mother's ex-husband. He would go back there as often as he could throughout his life. From Memphis, he could easily cross into Arkansas to reach West Memphis with its freewheeling base of jukes and party houses, then go to Marianna, Helena, and West Helena, wide open towns for black blues singers, which Robert could also reach via the Friars Point Ferry. If he went south from Clarksdale on Highway 61, he hit Alligator, Shelby, Mountain Bayou, Marigold, Cleveland, and Shaw. Conversely, if he headed south on Highway 49 west, he stopped at Tutwiler, Drew, and Ruleville. Highway 49 east took him to Minter City, Greenwood, Tachula, Yazoo City, Bentonia, where Skip James had lived and played, and finally into Jackson. From Jackson, south on Highway 51, Robert stopped at Crystal Springs, the home of Tommy Johnson, Hazelhurst, where his Aunt Clara lived, Beauregard and Wesson, and from there to Bogalusa, Louisiana, and over to Gulfport, Mississippi. Of the locations Robert frequented, Friars Point was particularly important. A ferry ran between there and Arkansas. Mississippi was still a dry state even after Prohibition ended in 1933, so liquor was transported into Friars Point by way of that ferry. That Delta River town was full of jukes, black lodges, and clubs. Robert loved playing in Friars Point for all those reasons and more. Elizabeth Moore ran a Friars Point juke and recalled that her husband used to bring Robert, before he had recorded, to play there on Saturday nights. She had moved there from Robinsonville, where Johnson had first played for her. He was staying over there in West Stover, across the river, and my husband went over there and got him. Brought him across the river on a ferry, and he played over here for about 2 or 3 months. He had 3 or 4 songs he did then, originals. In downtown Friars Point, Herzberg's store carried every item that the local residents needed: drugs, farm supplies, clothing, food. They extended credit too, an important consideration during the Depression. As a main meeting place for area residents, Herzberg's was the perfect location for Robert to play during the day, both to make extra money and to advertise where he would be that night. He would sit on one of the red wooden benches Herzberg had placed on either side of the front door, and his afternoon appearances drew such enormous crowds that they created a bottleneck, making it hard for anyone to get to the door. The owners found a simple solution. They would climb to the roof of the one-story building and throw vegetables down onto the entertained assembly to get them to disperse. Robert was used to drawing such crowds, however, and they just made the possibility of his making a decent night's pay and going home with the woman of his fancy more probable. The night in Hazelhurst that Rosa Redmond remembered was filled with men and women, dancing and drinking, whooping and hollering, pairing up for a night of partying and sex. They frolicked until Robert either went home with one of the women or collapsed drunk on the floor of the store to sleep it off. In a few short months, Robert would be a recording artist, and the next time they saw him, they might have even purchased his Terraplane Blues, a modest hit, and Kind-Hearted Woman Blues for their own home Victrolas. But on this particular night, the audience had no inkling of what was to come, and neither did Robert. They only knew that Robert Johnson was in town, a good guitar-playing, hard-drinking, woman-loving little man who kept them entertained. So who was this Robert Johnson? To find that out, we need to go back to the beginning.